Living my bucolic life, the ugly city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook them some spin and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red parsley pastures, beautiful my houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Oh, it's a windy day outside, so ignore the hair. New project. This is going to be way much simpler than that blue coat. It's going to be a top. So here we are. It's a McCalls top, and I'm going to be making this version here. I believe that's it. No, it is not. I'm making this version here. The difference is this one has little ruffles at the bottom of the sleeve and this one does not. So this is the one I'm making. It also has a dress option, which I think is basically you just extend it down, There is the number. So yeah, I think this is going to be nice. I am getting into my fall clothes and, a lot of darkness in that closet. And so I decided I need some tops to lighten everything up. Found this little fabric. It's a very lightweight, drapey kind of blouse fabric. Just polyester, but it's pretty. Anyway, this was a Joann Fabrics find. So yeah, I'm going to get started. I'm going to cut this out. I am going to be using the size 16 and my fabric is 60 inches is wide, so I only needed about 2 yards, which is nice. So let me get it cut out. So I'm kind of in the midst of cutting this out and I'm looking, and this is a very non-standard shaped pattern. Nothing there that looks really familiar, so this is going to be interesting. So, be aware. I'm going through a lot of pieces I don't need and putting them away. And I wanted to mention, just as a fun fact, I went to a grocery store this morning, drove my hour and a half into town to the Walmart. And I was wearing my Stevie Nicks fabulous jacket dress thing, and I got stopped a few times by ladies wanting to know where I got such a fabulous jacket. And I thought that was just wonderful because I was so nervous about wearing it in public, and it turns out people like it. So that's a fun thing. And yeah, so it looks like if you're going to be doing the long dress version, there is a separate skirt piece for that, but I am not, so I am not cutting that one out. All right, so got everything cut out, not the interfacing yet, I'll do that later. Taking a peek at this first piece, this piece number 1, it's got this really long tie, and as for something as simple and basic as this it looks like a little tunic top with a slit opening. It is anything than that. This thing it's wild what they've got going on. So one person asked, how do I decide what I'm going to serge and what I'm not? Basically, if it's going to unravel, I serge around the edges, and usually that's it. And this will unravel, this fabric, so I will be serging around the edges. And when I do that, I do use my knife, but I try to just take the little hairs off. I try not to actually cut strips of fabric off, just so that my piece will stay its original size. But just to give you a heads up, we've got a couple spots that we're going to have to stay stitch so we can clip to. We've got this tie thing that does this like elephant snout kind of deal here. There's a pleat. There is all kinds of things on this one little front piece. There are so many dots and things on here, and I don't want to lose their position. So actually, the first thing I'm going to do is punch out my dots and squares and everything else and mark those. Okay, and so here is another thing. I am going to be using my heat erasable pen to mark this, but you know, usually I do this off camera and everything goes well. I test it, and I don't know if you can see the little shadow of a squiggly line there, okay? That is what it looks like. If I hold it up this way, I think you can see it better. That's what it looks like when my pen has been erased. I have a slight shadow. So depending on your fabric and everything, you can decide at this point if it's worth it or not. What I have found, you know, and you do you, test your own fabrics and everything, is that even if it leaves this shadow after I wash my garment, the residual that has created that shadow is gone. So to me, because this is a washable garment, I am going to go ahead and use it. But just a heads up, if you're doing a really silky fabric, or honestly any fabric, go ahead and test it first on a scrap, you know. Normally, 90-something% of the time, it's 100% okay. But this time it did leave a little bit of a shadow. So, you know, because of the position of where my marks are going to be in darts or in pleats, where there's naturally going to be a shadow because of that seam line anyway. It's not going to matter to me. So anyhow, with all of that said, I am going to be punching out my dots with my little piece of leather. And make sure you put a piece of leather between your tissue paper and your fabric. You do not want to punch all the way through. That would be a bad thing. But I'm going to go ahead and punch out all of these circles, and I will be right back. All right, I have marked and serged around these two, and the right side to my late afternoon eyes looks so similar to the wrong side that I am putting little clips on my right side, so at a glance I can tell what is what. So the first thing I need to do is find my two little dots down here and up there. And because I used a red marking pen on fall leaves, my marks are kind of hidden as it is. But we're going to need to put some stay stitching, I'd say at least 1 inch on either side of the dot. And I would do that at the 5/8 inch seam allowance. We have so many dots. If this is a fold line, I don't think it's that one. All right, well, let's just start with this one down here. Here is my little dot, and actually I'm going to put a clip there so I can see it easier. So there's a clip down here. Okay, so it is this one. This square is the one that they want you to do that to. And that little mark is right here next to this leaf. So I'm going to put a clip there. So basically on each one of these, I'm going to want to do a row of stitching in a thread that disappears, you know, that blends in. So I'll be using white because this stays in. About 1 inch before it, up to it, and then down below it. Just along that same 5/8 inch stitching line that we're going to do all of our seams at. For this one up here, that is this square, and this one down here, which is marked center front, which is next to the pleats. So I'm going to do that on both of the front pieces. All right, so I've got my stay stitching in here, and I need to clip in it, but I'm looking really closely at my fabric, trying to decide if my needle needs to be replaced. I put a number 9 needle in, but it wasn't brand spanking new, it was new-ish. But maybe you can tell. I have some tiny little, what looks like kind of like snags on there. You know, they're not bad. Now, honestly, if you're not really looking for them, you won't see them. But I think I'm going to change out my needle one more time just to make sure it's a brand new number 9, just so it'll be nice and sharp, and hopefully I won't get any more of those little snags. But in the meantime, this is my little dot right there, and there's my stitching up to it. Okay, and I'm going to clip to that dart, to that stitching, but not cut the stitching, so that I can open it up like that. So on each piece there was 2 of them. There was the little square over on the side here too. Oh my gosh, I have 2 marks that look like they might be. I need to change my marking pen. I'm going to mark with a black marking pen after this, just because the red one, it blends much too well. Okay, it was the one in the leaf. All right. So I'm going to clip up to this one, put this marking pen away, and get my black one so that I can at least see what I'm doing. So now that I have this done, I'm going to go ahead and make my pleat. Okay, here are my marks for my pleat. Now this is my right side. I can tell because of my pen, my little clip here, but also my colors are more vibrant on this side than this side, okay? I have marked these on the wrong side, but you can kind of see through it, all right? So usually I mark my pleats on my right side, but because it goes all the way through, that's fine. Now let's see, how do they want us to do these pleats? They want us to go towards the outside edge. Okay, so they want us to go this way, so I'm going to match up these two dots and bring them over to these two dots here and stick a pin right here. Okay, so now I have this little bitty pleat like that, and they want us to baste across the lower part and up here. So it looks like this is hand basting that's going to get pulled out, so I'm going to do that with just a needle and thread. So just a little stitch like that, just to hold it. I'm going to stitch it all the way up to these top circles up here. And then I am pretty sure I'm going to be pulling this out after everything is said and done and everything, and this is just to hold it nicely in the beginning. So I'll just be making one little back stitch up here at the very top to kind of hold it in place, and that'll make it easier to pull out when I'm all done. Okay. So this is what it looks like. I just got a little rough stitch going across and up here holding that pleat together. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other front side. All right, and finally on this front piece still, there is a dot right here. I put my little clip there so I can keep track of it. And a notch. Where are you, notch? Here's my notch. All right, I'm going to put a little mark there so we can see it. So here is a notch, here is a dot, and they also want me to run stay stitching between those two. Okay, so I've got my stay stitching here, and it's not exactly at 5/8, it's a little bit less, I'd say somewhere between 1/2 inch and 5/8. But now I am putting these right sides together, and since I'm making this seam now, I can take those off because I'll have a good cheat sheet here. And there are two dots in the front here, right there. And I need to match up those dots on this side to this side. And I'm going to sew it together between those two dots and those two dots only at 5/8 of an inch. And once I have that sewed together, then it looks like I press this seam allowance open. All right, so this is sewed together and I pressed this open, and while I had it on my ironing board, I went ahead and just, where this is open, just continued to kind of press this at about 5/8 also. This is that opening in the front, this big V opening here. So looks kind of deep at this point, but you know what? It might not be. But now that I have that, we're going to do some funky things with these ties. So keeping an eye on where our stitching ended up, because that is a dot that's going to be important. I'm opening this up so I can look at the right sides, folding it in half, and where this dot was reinforced and clipped so it could open this way, that is going to match up over here. And I think I'm going to sew these one at a time so I don't get them all tangled up with each other. So just kind of flipping all of this stuff out of the way. I'm going to pin these two sides here together at the dot. All right. I'm just doing one tie at a time here. Then I'm folding the rest of this big old tie piece in half. Let me match up these corners and this little point down here. Tick it in twice. All right, and this part here was stay stitch. This part was not. Is there a reason for that? It looks like they're anticipating that one is more curved than the other, and that the part that is stay stitched, that we are going to be clipping up to that stay stitching so that it can curve to match this other side. Okay, so with this, I'm going to bring these up, and just try to match them up. It does seem to help having those little clips. I think if I flip it over this way so I can watch the clipped side, it might make more sense. So I'm just going to very carefully pin it together, matching my curved side to my straight side. And I am getting the impression that there is no way this is supposed to line up straight. It's just this off curve to straight thing so that you can get this interesting drape type of business here. There were a couple notches that I could have been working on matching, but once I started clipping everything, it kind of blended, and it's not that long of a distance. So, all right, so I've got all this pinned here. So what I need to do is sew from this dot right here, which is the bottom of where we just made this seam, okay? So from this dot, with everything else pulled up here out of the way, I'm going to come down here at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do it so I can look at my clip side, just so I don't get anything wonky. Coming down here and up. Actually, I'll be coming up and up that way, but you get the idea. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, I am going to try to turn these right side out, these ties. It says that I need to press them once I get them turned. So I think I will do that and then probably call it a night for tonight because it's getting dark. And I've got stuff to do downstairs. So, oh my goodness. All right. Flinging it seemed to help. Oh, shoot. I forgot to trim the corners of that to take the bulk out before I did it. And I need to do that because this is so thin. So you don't need to see me flip this back around. What I need to do though is come in here, clip that off, and I'm actually going to clip it to a fat 1/8 of an inch inside here and an 1/8 of an inch away, like that. All right, so my bottom looks like this. So when I turn this side, right side out, it should look a lot better than the other one, and I'll just fix that other one. Hello, welcome to the next day, and I feel a lot more alert and everything. Sometimes when you're tired and you're sewing, you just make stupid mistakes. And I could tell I was getting ready to go down that road where I could do something that would take a long time to pick my way out of. So I just stopped for the day, came back, and now I feel better. You know, that helps a lot. So when we were last together, I had sewed these ties and turned them right side out. And it wanted you to press them, okay? And so what I did is I kind of tried to press the side that I sewed. This is on a fold over here. But they're wonky because one side is curved and one side is straight. So if you try to get that seam line pressed flat, the other side's not going to lay flat. I made it so the ends were at least pressed so that it looked like a tie down there. But as it got higher and higher up the tie, I just did it at the seam line. I'm letting the fold part be as it is, and we're just going to move forward. So it looks like the next step is putting the peplum onto the front piece. Okay, so this is my peplum piece. It is one that was cut on a fold, And there are some dots. I have already punched them out, but there's one up here at the very fold, you know, a seam allowance down. There's notches to clip, and I have clipped those. I am using my black pen so that my marks will show up this time, because, you know, having your marks blend in with the fabric didn't help me very much. So let me go ahead and mark it on this side also. And then I am going to use a fusible stay tape on this one. Okay, so over at my ironing board, this is the wrong side of my peplum. I have not serged around it yet. I want to put my stay tape on first. And I am using a stay tape. I need to look this up where I got it. I got it on Etsy somewhere a while back. I need to look it up. But I'll try to post that. This is a kind of like a woven twill tape type place right here that is stitched onto a bias, and so it molds to curves really well. So what I'm going to do is place it so the tape part that is not flexible is pretty close to, but still inside my seam allowance. I just got that started there. Okay, and so by doing that, because this is like 1 centimeter wide and my seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, so we're doing all kinds of math things here, but basically I'm putting the edge of this about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. But because this stuff is cut on a bias, but it still has the stability of stay tape, I can just iron it on here, and it's going to hold this edge, keep it from wanting to stretch out of shape, but not give me puckers that other types of stay tape will do. So I'm just going to iron it on here. If my marks disappear because of the heat of the iron, I can just draw them back on, not a problem. Okay, so just up close, you can see that is what it looks like. And the whole point of that is keeping this curve from stretching out of shape. So if I go like this and even tug on it, this is still going to stay the same length. It's not going to stretch out. So now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and serge around the edges, just at the very edge, not cutting off any fabric if I can help it. And I'll be right back. All right, so I have it serged all the way around. You can see there pretty wide serging stitches, because, you know, we don't need really close up ones, less bulk that way. And I did serge around the bottom. We are hemming it right now, so it might not be 100% necessary if you use a fabric that is, you know, not going to unravel on you, but this is. And you can see how it kind of wants to cup up. I was actually hoping it would want to cup up even more. I should have adjusted my serger so it would do that, but I did not. So I'm going to go ahead and run a line of stitching 1/4 inch in from the edge. And you're going to do that with the stitches fairly wide, because that way we can kind of cinch it in. So where this is cupped up, that's going to be really easy to fold up. But over here where it's flat, it's not. So just, you know, to make my life easier, 1/4 inch seam allowance, nice long stitches all the way across the bottom. Okay, got a new phone, got to get that set up. This one, love it, but it's about 6 years old and it has become obsolete, and they won't even service the upgrades for it anymore. So a bunch of my apps weren't working anymore, couldn't go on Instagram, couldn't do other things, and so it was time. So hopefully once I get my new phone up and going, I can get back on Instagram and put some things up, because that would be nice. Anyhow, I've got this line of stitching here, and I did it 1/4 inch in from the edge, so you can just kind of see it right there. What I'm doing is I'm going to start at the middle, just turn it up, just past that serging, turn it up again. So I'm putting one in the very middle, one on each side, like this. And then I'm going to split the difference, put one right here. Okay, so let's say I got to these 2 pins, and when I went to fold this up, it was too bulky. then I could pull on that little hem, that little stitch, but I don't need to. So let's not use that one as an example. Let me just keep on going. I might not even need it. And you know what? I think just that little extra of when I stitched it is gathering it enough. If it didn't, you know, you can always just tug one of them. Tug the bobbin one is easier. Put a little bit of gather in there, okay? Just a tiny bit, because this is not a huge thing. But if you ever got to a point where you're doing a curve and there's way too much fullness, all you do is you put your little pin through one of those stitches, like halfway through where you are, and tug it, and that's going to put that extra little pucker right where you need it. So at this point, it looks like I really didn't need that extra row of stitching too much, but I'll tell you there is a back peplum, and what I'm going to do on that one, which I had meant to do on this one and did not, is on a serger there's an adjustment you can make that does a slight gather. You know, you can adjust it however much you want, but it'll kind of do a slight gather. And I'm just going to barely set that so that when I serge that bottom edge of the next peplum, which will be the back peplum, it'll gather it a little bit more as I go around it. And so that just combines everything into one little step. But this is good. So once I get this all pinned up, I'm going to come back and very carefully sew it, just edge stitching it along the edge here, and then I will be pressing this hem flat. So here's my little peplum, still hemmed, pressed up, so my hem on here is laying pretty flat. And now I need to sew this to the bottom of my front piece, which is actually really confusing. So on this front piece, we have this little point here where all of the ties, which are up here, hanging down, are. And this point here, where these two come together, is the center, I believe. Yes, it is. So I have my little center dot right here that I am going to put these centered onto. I have a slight little gap there, so I'm just going to try to push it together as close as I can, because this is kind of nuts, but you know, you never know, it might turn out well. Okay, so I'm going to put this other side here, so we get these two pieces meeting in the middle, basically. So I've got, this is like a tail tucked in, you know, this is the inside out, tails are out here. And I have one seam allowance that ends here, one that ends here. This is the center point, and I'm just kind of meeting them together, hoping for the best. And I'm going to take this, match it up to the side. There is a notch in between here that I will match up, and then even everything out. So here's my notch right here, which is matching up, so that's good. That means we're on the right path here. And then pinning this together, and I'll do the same pinning on this side so it's nice and straight. Okay, so this point right here, you know, you have no idea what that is, but this is the point I'm concerned about. It's where everything is coming together right here. But looking at the diagram, that's where the knot of our tie is. So even if it's might get a little bit off, it's not a big deal because the tie will cover it. But what I'm concerned about is it's a little open, okay? So I'm going to, this was my new plan, I'm going to start, when I'm sewing across here, I'm going to be very careful as I come across this point. So I'll probably sew up to this point where everything is, leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, shift all this stuff, because there's a whole bunch of stuff right here. Shift it all over to the other side, put the presser foot back down, and then continue across. Once I have all that, if I need to get a needle and thread and hand stitch a few things just to cinch up that gap, I can do that. But here it is, all pinned together. I'm going to go stitch it across here at 5/8 of an inch. This is looking at it the right way. This is the peplum, this is the top front, and these are my funky little ties right here. Okay, so I'm pushing that one up and this one. I got a lot of stuff coming together. Now this hole right here, that's the one I said I was kind of concerned about. So what I'm going to do is just get my needle and thread and come in here, make a few stitches just to try to cinch everything together by hand so that there's not a hole there. I'm for some reason having motor function issues this morning. But I'm just going to try to, you know, cinch everything together as invisibly as possible, you know, but keep it all nice and tight there so I won't have that hole. Because the other thing is, if that hole stays there, it could make a weak point. So when I do wash it, it might want to pull apart and everything, and we don't want that. So I'm just kind of taking my time. I'm going to work my way around just because we have like 4 different really oddly shaped fabrics all coming together at this one little point right here. And I think that that's just the best way to do it. So once I get this done and I can, you know, hide my knot on the inside and everything, I can come back. Remember these tiny little pleats that we have the basting threads on? I can pull those out and I'm going to iron it so that that pleat will look like it's there, but it'll also erase my little marking pin because I don't want that. So let me get this tied off, those erased, and these basting stitches pulled out, and I'll be right back. All right, so while I was working on that at the ironing board, you're supposed to press this seam allowance up, and in order to do that so it lays flat, you have to clip some notches into the peplum seam allowance. So I did that. Honestly, right here, trying to get everything to press up is a little bit tricky. But before we move on, there's one more thing we need to do here. And on the side here, there was one of these places where we reinforced and then clipped to a dot. That is going to make a pleat. So I'm folding that. There's like a kick out point here, and there's on the pattern, there's a mark here for fold line. Where this point is, that's where the fold line is, at the most extensive part. And it folds down and meets up with the seam down here. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of fold it and pin it so that this is matching up with the seam down here. So this is the seam for my peplum. This is the peplum, this is the top, this is my fold, and it's right here. And this is that dot and the reinforcement. So this part of the blouse, I'm just pinning it straight across here, like this, lining up with the side seam here, and I am going to baste this edge right here. Actually, I'm going to machine baste it 1/4 inch in from here to here. I've got to do the same thing on this side of the blouse. So if you missed it the first time, it's taking this little mark here that we clipped up to, folding that and matching it up down here to the peplum seam. All right, so I just pinned this onto my dress form to get a look at what in the world we're doing, because this is just, it feels wrong, but you know, here we go. So I just pinned the top up here, the shoulder part. This I pinned down here and at the waist, okay, where this little pleat thing is. And the same on the other side. So this is what we have. I have not tied those ties. Let me go ahead and do that really quick. Okay, so I just gave the ties a little quick knot so we can see what it looks like. Lots of drape and everything. And it's actually kind of pretty. It just seems bizarre in the pattern, but it's actually really pretty. So here's something I just noticed. When I was pinning this on, I was expecting this to be a very loose, drapey thing that you would just pull over your head because it looks like there's so much excess fabric, but there's not. This is actually extremely fitted in here at the waist, and So I looked, and they have an invisible zipper in the back of this. So that's how you're going to get in and out of it. It is a zip up the back blouse. So that's interesting. But anyhow, in case you were trying to figure out how all these puzzle pieces fit together, that is it. So that point where I was trying to make sure that everything came together is this little point right here behind the knot. And, you know, like I said, since it's behind the knot, no one sees it, but I just felt better closing all of that up. And I think that knot's going to be permanent. It's not going to be that you have to tie it on and take it off. It's just, it's for decoration. So anyhow, that's it so far. All right, so this back piece is a whole lot simpler than the front piece. It has a big dart in it and notches, of course. So I have clipped my notches. I am marking my dart, and I will be serging it around the edge of this whole piece because it is this fabric. But what I'm going to also do, besides making the dots, is, of course, because it is me, I like to draw the legs of my markings. And this is the wrong side of my fabric. It is not nearly as vibrant as the right side. So I'm just going to draw my little dart legs on there. Okay, so I have it all marked. So before I serge it, I'm going to make my dart. That way when I go to serge, there's only one layer of fabric. And even though this fabric is so crazy thin, it really wouldn't add any bulk anyway. It's just a habit, so that's how I do it. So I stick my pin down one dot, up the other one, pinching it over here at the top. Gonna stick a pin down over here, tuck my pin down, and I'll put one halfway. And because I drew my little dart legs, it's easy for me to see the path. So starting on the outside here, I'm going to stitch all the way up to the dart, and I'm going to do that on both of my back pieces. And then once that is done, pressing the dart towards the center. So this dart will be pressed towards the center, and then serging around it, making sure that I'm serging with the dart pressed in the way it should be. Okay, so when I'm going to sew the dart, I start at the edge and come in. But since this fabric is so light, and I do this for light stuff, for lace, things like that, I put a piece of tissue paper, you know, just left over from a pattern or something, fold that over the edge, and I can start it on the tissue paper. And you probably cannot see it, but I can see my line in there, and that way it's not going to push my fabric into the little hole there and gum everything up. I can just get going, and then the paper is so light that when I am done with this, I can just kind of rip it off because the tissue paper is like perforated and everything. So anyhow, let me get all the way down to the end here. And usually I backstitch on my darts, but I am not for this just because this fabric is so lightweight. Okay, so I have my dart made. I'm just going to make a big old knot, loopy single knot like this. Pull my tail through it. Stick a pin through that loop to the top of my dart like this and pull it. And it's going to track that knot down to the top of the dart. Give it a nice little tug and clip it off. Okay, so now the next step is to pull on my tissue paper off and press this dart towards the center, which is this way over here. All right, so these back pieces are done. I got the little dart sewed in and pressed to the side and lightly serged across the bottom, and that locks that dart going in the right direction. And now it's time for the back peplum. So just like the front, I am going to mark my dots. This dot down here, I am assuming is for the bottom of the zipper. Time will tell. But I do need to serge around these pieces also, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now they want you to stay stitch these. Sorry, I am going to be ironing on that same stay tape that I put on the front ones on each piece of the back. There's obviously two, and I'm going to be fusing that to the wrong side. So you don't need to see that twice. I'm going to go to my ironing board, fuse that on, and then serge around it. You know, not cutting anything off if I can help it, just serging around it to keep it from fraying, and then I'll be back to mark it up. Okay, so I have these, you know, the tape applied, serging around it, and I actually, for a moment, tried to adjust my serger so it would gather. Did not want to with this fabric, so I put it back to normal. But if the front peplum is any indication, there really isn't so much of a curve that it's going to be a problem, just, you know, turning up and turning up. Even though I'm encasing this serging, you know, it actually helps me to have it on there because it gives kind of a definition and kind of a place where the fold is going to come more easier because of that stitch. More easier, is that even a word? Anyhow, what I'm doing is I'm just folding it up just past the serging and then folding it over one more time, which is going to give me the same size hem as the front, even though I'm not doing that extra stitching. Sometimes silky fabrics can be a little bit troublesome, but it's actually behaving itself quite well this morning. So I'm going to go ahead, sew the hem on both of these bottom pieces. I don't need to do the sides because that will be sewed shut, so just the bottoms. So my next caution on working with little lightweight silky fabrics is to make sure you use very nice, clean, sharp straight pins. One of the pins that I put in, it was not very sharp, so just like my needle kind of made little snags, the pin made a little snaggy mark. So, okay, so I've got this sewed at the bottom, you know, just did a little narrow hem. It actually went really well without doing that extra seam to pull it in, didn't need it. So I'm going to go ahead and iron it right now just to flatten this out, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here is my pressed peplum. This is the corresponding back piece that it goes with, and I do have these marked. That's my little mark where my zipper is going to end. And if you get confused on how it works, the center back is 99% always on the straight of grain. So if you look real closely at your fabric, well, I don't know if you can see it on this, but the grains go up and down and right and left. So I know this is my center if you ever lose track. So what I need to do now for each of these pieces is to flip it up and pin it on here and sew it straight across at 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to do both of the back sides. Okay, so they are sewed together. I need to press the seam allowances up, but before that, on this peplum side of the seam allowance, I'm just clipping some notches every couple inches all the way across, just so it'll lay a lot flatter. All right, so next up, the instructions want you to sew the two side seams together, and after that, put the zipper in. I, however, am reversing the order, putting the zipper in now while I just have two flat pieces, way easier to deal with. And then once that's done, then I can sew the side seams and it'll be easier. So I have my invisible zipper, and my invisible zipper is actually, you can see here, longer, but that's okay. I can shorten that easily. But I want to point out this dot here is where they want you to end your zipper, okay? And it's a couple inches from the edge. But when you're buying a zipper, like say I am stitching this down and I'm sewing and sewing and sewing my invisible zipper foot, I'm going to want to sew up to this point, which means that I need to have my, well, let's just say my zipper pull has to be far enough below that my invisible zipper foot can get all the way to this point without messing around with it. So usually I want to get a invisible zipper, if possible, that's a couple inches longer than what I actually need. It just makes it a whole lot easier, you know. A lot smoother transition. So for this invisible zipper, the first thing I need to do is go over to the ironing board and iron it. It's got these little coils that you kind of uncurl a little bit and iron it flat, and that makes it a lot easier to sew. And this is the invisible zipper foot that I'm using. They come in, you know, plastic. They come in different shapes and sizes. I like this one. It's got the 2 little grooves. So that's what I'm going to be using on my machine. Now, the way that we're going to be placing this, I'm just going to do one side at a time. So the first thing I do is I make a little mark up here, 1/2 inch down from the raw edge, okay? That is the point that I want my little stopper to be under when I'm placing it. And the next thing I do, because some zippers are different, I measure the width of the tape, and that is 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the tape up to where the coils are, okay? If I'm sewing a 5/8 inch seam allowance, that means that I need a 1/4 inch outside the tape. And I want to try to get this as even as possible, so I'm going to draw my lines, but this will be in the seam allowance so no one's going to see it. So just straightening out my fabric, I'm just going to make some little lines here at a 1/4 inch in. And this fabric is very silky, so I'm marking a little more than I normally would if it's a very stable fabric, just because I don't want anything to get terribly out of whack here. If you can see that little line, let me move this one out of the way. I'm going to continue down here in the peplum, working it at a 1/4 inch up to where my little dot is. I'm going to put a little line across there just to emphasize where that dot is. Okay, so this is my fabric, and it is right side up, and I want my zipper to be right side down. Okay, my zipper pull is down here. And if I line up the edge of my tape where the line that I drew is, okay, when I actually stitch it, my stitching line is going to be at 5/8 in. So at this point, this is where I need it to be. Now, instead of pinning it on, I am going to use my double stick basting tape. So let me go get that. This is a double-sided, water-soluble basting tape. When you wash it, the residue comes off, you know, everything's great. And I want to use that to glue this on. So keeping track of which side and which, you know, side and everything of the tape, I need to put my tape, this, on this side of this zipper tape. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to start it up here at the top. It has paper on one side, not on the other, and put it all the way down this one side. Okay, so I'm only going down to here because my zipper is too long, so I don't need it to go all the way to the bottom. But just pressing it on really, really well, and then I'm going to try to carefully peel off that paper. And sometimes it's a lot easier to get it started poking it with a pin to hold the sticky part down while I pull the paper part up. Okay, so now that I have all the backing paper off, I'm going to flip it over and carefully position it so that the edge of the tape is at my 1/4 inch line, and my little stopper, this little stopper here, is just below that 1/2 inch mark that I drew. And that looks about right. So now I'm just going to carefully press it. I already messed that up a bit, scooching it down all the way down, so it's going to stay exactly where I want it to be. This works a lot better than pins, in my opinion, for zippers. You just get a lot more confidence in where you're going to be sewing and everything. So, alrighty. So now, making sure that I'm going to draw this line where I need to stop on top of my tape down here so I see it. I'm going to be using my invisible zipper foot, And it's got these little creases, so I have pressed this coil so it's kind of opening up this way. And when I'm sewing it, I'm going to be putting it through this little crease here, this first one, okay? And you can see on top the hole for my needle, so it'll make a stitch right down alongside this coil right here. Alright, so this is sewed on. This is what it looks like. When you get to the peplum, make sure that you keep this seam allowance pressed up, you know, so it's going the right way as you stitch it. So I'm going to set this aside for just a minute, get my other back piece, and I need to draw that same guideline at 1/4 inch all the way down on this side. Okay, so I have that line drawn, and so this is the one that I've already sewed, wrong side up here. And so just to be sure that we're going to put our zipper on the right way, I am just going to open this up, lay it on here to make sure I have it correct, okay? So what I need to do is, before I place it, I need to put another, where's my tape? Here's my tape. Another row of my double-sided tape on this side of the zipper, and it's going to be on the right side. So you're putting it on the side that when you see the zipper pull, that's the correct one, okay? So let me flip this up and put my row of tape right down here. All right, so I've got the paper pulled off the tape. I'm flipping the side we already sewed, right side down on top here. And I need to line this side similar to the other one, where I'm starting at the top here, making sure that little stopper is just below my 1/2 inch mark, which should put the top of the tape about equal with the top of the garment. You can see on this one just the little pokies stick out the top, and it does here too. And then I'm going to work my way all the way down, aligning the edge of my zipper tape with that guideline that I drew. Just to make sure everything is good before I get started, I'm going to lay these two on top of each other to make sure that both of these places where the crosshatch mark is lining up, and that my bottom is lining up. So if this is my 5/8 inch mark here, and I put my zipper like that, will the two bottom seams match up? Yes, they will, and that is important to me. But I can tell you this, when I open it up, it looks like one of my little notches is about 1/8 of an inch above the other one. And that's just because, you know, silky fabric moves a little bit. But because this side is sewn already, that's the side I'm going to go with. So I'm going to draw my little mark on this side about 1/8 of an inch higher. So now I'm going to go back to my sewing machine, and this time I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. But because I have everything glued in place with that tape, it shouldn't shift, so it should be okay. Sometimes if you pin things instead, you'll have to always come from the top to the bottom, you know, just to make sure if it's shifting the same direction on both sides. But like I said, since I'm taping it or basting it, hand basting does the same thing. You can go the opposite direction. So let me go ahead, starting down here at this hash mark, and work my way up. Alrighty, so I've got it stitched. I've turning them so it's wrong sides up here. So now I'm going to zip it and see how it looks. So if I'm pulling it, oops, I think I got fabric cut in there. Which happens, it happens. The thing with invisible zippers is once you get it sewn in, it looks like a seam. It is invisible. So I don't really want to press this really hard with my iron because I don't want my zipper to flatten out. I want it to kind of give me that nice roll, but I'll probably steam it a little bit. So this is what it looks like down the back. Now I have to deal with this part down here. All right. The thing that I like to do is make sure 100% that my bottom is going to match up. Okay. Especially because they're already hemmed. Here's the thing. If this is going to be a problem or you have a thicker fabric, you might want to wait to hem this back until after you have all this done. And that way, in case there is a little bit of a staggering, when you hem the bottom of the peplum, you can just kind of blend it all together. But, you know, the instructions said to do it first, and so we did. I decided to go ahead and shorten up the zipper before I do anything else. So I just have, you know, some good strong thread, and right below that mark that I drew where my zipper end should be, I'm just going to put several loops going around there. And I will tie it off very securely to make sure that the zipper in no way wants to go past that. All right, so on this top, you know, I always do things differently. I am cutting it fairly short. I am taking the end of my zipper only probably about 1/8 of an inch below where I have all that stitching. But I'm going to do a couple of things here. Actually, I'm going to take the tapes to that same level, and I am going to put my clear nail polish on it. It's going to do a couple things. It's going to keep the zipper tapes from wanting to fray out, but also it's going to kind of glue my threads together so that it won't ever want to come undone. So I'm just going to hold that up for a moment so it doesn't touch the rest of the fabric and let it dry. Okay, so now this is what it looks like. I'm just holding my ends together, opening it up, and I can see pretty clearly where that stitching ends. So I'm going to use a narrow foot if you have a zipper foot or something that you need to be able to get right in there. If you don't have a foot where you can get really close to this stitching, you know, you can leave a gap and then do that last 1/2 inch by hand. I do that sometimes. It's not a big deal. But I want to make sure that I pin my 2 ends down here so that they're going to line up correctly. Okay, and then I'm going to sew it starting at 5/8 here, but making sure that my stitching ends up right there. So I almost got there. I got like within 1/8 of an inch away. Okay, but that's okay. When you open it up, that 1/8 of an inch away is underneath that little tail of the zipper, so it's not going to be a big deal. So from the outside, doing it this way where you don't sew the garment closed until after you put the zipper in, you don't end up with a bubble right here, okay? So that helps a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and iron this down here and then just like press this by hovering, steaming, and then pressing it with my hands just because I don't want to uncurl my zipper. Alrighty, so then here's my back. Almost done with it. What I need to do right now is come in here on the insides and just double check. Sometimes I like to tack these 2 sides down just to make sure they're going to hold and not poke out like that or something. So I think I might do that just with a couple little hand stitches. If your tape on your zipper is really wide or it's doing weird things, sometimes it's good to come back and just hand tack the edge of that zipper tape to the edge of the seam allowance in here, not going all the way through, just to the seam allowance to hold it so it's not going to want to curl in or anything like that. But this, it's very narrow. I don't think that's an issue there, but I am going to go ahead and hand stitch these down. Or actually, since it's machine stitched on the outside, I'll just machine stitch over it and then it'll be ready. Alrighty, so here's my back, and I'm just going to try to straighten out my sides some, put my front so that they are right sides together on top. I want to make sure that my peplum seam is matched up very carefully here, where that on the front it's got that fold and all kinds of things going on there. But I want to try to make sure that the seam for that peplum is close together. There's kind of like a fold drapey part over it, so if it's not exact, it's not the end of the world, but still you want to get close. And then I'm going to match up this bottom, and I am still thinking if I was to do this over again, I would not hem the peplum until I got all of this done, because that way you can make sure that the hem is going to be nice all the way around, whereas this way you're hemming up with seam allowances, and I just think it would be easier to hem last. So just throwing that out there if anyone's interested. So let me go ahead and pin this, and then I'm going to sew up the seam allowance on both sides at 5/8 of an inch. Come on now. Just like this on both sides. And then I'm going to be pressing the seam allowance open. And while I was pinning this, I was looking, and there is this dot marking on the peplum down here in the middle, and I was trying to figure out what in the world that was for. And it turns out that is for the dress option. If it's just the top you're making, that doesn't mean anything. All right, so I wanted to show you, I just machine stitched over my seam allowances down here. I probably should have slip stitched them, hand slip stitching them, but I didn't. You know, I just ran an extra seam just to keep those wanting to lay flat. I did the same thing in the back here where the zipper is, and over here on the other side, okay? And then after that, I pressed my side seams open, and I'm gonna pop this over onto my dress form and get started on the sleeves. Okay, so this is my sleeve, and it has a big dart on the very top of it, and I've punched out my holes, but these two holes here are triangles. And those triangles usually means that that is the shoulder seam line. So this is going to be the very top of our shoulder. The front has a dot here, which is going to match up, and the back has a dot. I think my paper got a little skewed, but it'll give me the idea. Basically, this dot is a seam allowance in each way, and same with this one, it's a seam allowance in each way. So, but this is the dart that I really need. So I've gone ahead and clipped my notches. I'm going to mark this dot and draw the legs in as I do. Okay, so I've got my dart marked. I'm just going to make it here by putting my pen, as usual, down one dot and back up the next one. Same thing for the second set. And then pinch it at the very tip. So I've got all my darts here. Just going to anchor these pins in, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew it. And just like the other one, I'm not going to back stitch this. I will just leave a big long tail and tie it off like I did before for both of these sleeve darts. I have my dart made, and it gets pressed towards the back. The back has the two notches, you know. I'm not drawing a big letter B on this one like I usually do, just because I don't feel like it, and I can pretty much see my notches really clearly, so I think I'm okay there. But after I made my dart and pressed it to the back, then I serged all the way around the sides just to keep it from fraying. And now I am going to match up these side seams, pin them carefully, and I will sew this at 5/8 also and press it open. All right, so I need to press these seams open, and I'm slipping a seam roll in here because that's going to make it a lot easier to press so I don't screw anything up. And I just noticed there are dirty little footprints all over my ironing board, and it's that Midna cat. I might have seen her in some other videos, but she loves to get up and sleep on this ironing board because it's right next to the window, you know, and it's like the high kitty cat spot. And so I'm hoping I don't get black cat hair and mud on these before I get done. You know, she's a cute cat. I didn't really intend to only own black cats. It just kind of happened by default, but you know, we love her anyway. And just like around the peplum, they want us to make what they call a 5/8 inch narrow hem. And what that is basically if you turn the edge up to 5/8 and then tuck this under, okay? But for me, it's easier just to tuck and tuck. So just doing the same little narrow hem. See, dropped a pin all the way around the edge of the bottom of both of these sleeves. So it's this nice wide sleeve. And before I cut out this pattern, I did look at the size, and these sleeves are full enough, so I didn't need to adjust them. And the bust was a good size, so it should be okay. So this is actually a pattern that I did not have to make any adjustments on so far, you know. And it looks good on the dress form, but you never know for sure until you try it on. You know, moving people are a little bit little bit different than a static dress form, so we will see then. But I'm going to go ahead, fold, pin this hem up, and go ahead and stitch it, edge stitch it all the way around. So I wanted to show you what the back looks like at this point. It again is just stick pinned in there. And so it is a very fitted waist. So be aware, very fitted waist. Peplum, 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 all the way around. And then here is the front. Okay, so now I'm going to take it off the dress form so we can insert these sleeves. Okay, so I have turned my blouse inside out, and this is my side seam. I just have it kind of doubled up on itself this way. Put my sleeve right side out, and I need to make sure I get the right sleeve on the right side. So this is the back of my blouse. On the sleeve, the dart is pressed towards the back, and the back has 2 notches on the side. The front only has 1. So this is the back of the sleeve, back of the blouse, we're good. So I'm just going to tuck this in here and match up this underarm part first. Come up to the top. And remember there were dots. I actually have ironed them off, but I can see that it's just where the seam allowance would be. So that dot would be 5/8 inch this way and that way. I can eyeball that. That is right here. Okay. And then match up the notches, even all of this out. It's going to fit without any easing there. Same thing up at the front piece. Take the front of my blouse, the front of my sleeve piece, and pin those together and pin the entire armhole this way. Come on now. So it looks like the front's going to fit together very well, match the notch right here, and I'm not going to need to do any easing on the front either, which is lovely. So once I get all of this pinned, I am going to come back and sew this entire U shape, you know, from right up here all the way down to right up here at 5/8 inch. I'm going to use you know, just a standard nice and tight sleeve type of a stitch. And then I'm going to come back and make a second pass 1/8 of an inch in from there. So I'm going to have 2 rows of stitching on my sleeve. So 1 at 5/8 and 1 at 1/2 an inch, all the way up and down the U on both sides of my blouse. Okay, so here's my top right now, looking lovely. What I need to do now is work on the facing. So let me set this aside here for a minute and get my facing piece. I need to cut inner facing for this, and I am using once again my extremely lightweight fusible interfacing. Okay, so let me go ahead and cut this out. It is just about the lightest weight fusible interfacing I know that I can find. And I don't want to add any stiffness to this, but the interfacing is going to give it enough body that it's going to hold its shape, and that's what you want in a facing. So I'm going to cut 2 of these out. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the ironing board and press the interfacing onto my pieces before I do any of the marks. It just works out a lot better for me that way. Making sure I'm putting the side with the fusible dots onto the right side, because that is important. When I'm fusing this, I do use a lot of steam, and I'm pressing it like this. I'm not ironing it like this, at least until I get it fused. Once I get it all fused on this side, you know, if you want to flip it over and give it a quick iron, that's great. But for the initial time when you're applying the interfacing, just press it on straight up and down. So I have it fused on. I wanted to show you my fabric stretched out about 1/8 of an inch beyond the interfacing. And the interfacing is the stable part of this relationship, so it is the one that stayed true to the pattern size. The fabric, because, you know, it is what it is, it just kind of grew, so we're cutting the fabric back to match the interfacing. Anyhow, now that everything is at its final size, I can go ahead and punch out my marks here. So I have this dot here towards the bottom, and that is what we're going to sew from that point down. And then up here there is a shoulder mark, and that is what's going to line up with that dart on the top of the sleeve. And then the center back seam, well, that will be where the zipper is. But the backs stay open because there's a back zipper, and so we just kind of individually close up each side as it comes. Okay, so before I actually sew this together, I need to finish the outside edge of these two pieces. And I am just going to serge around it. I will tighten up my serging so that the stitch length is a little closer than I did on my other pieces, which was like at the widest that it could be. But I'm just going to serge around here. I think that if I like turned it and stitched it, that might actually poke through and be seen from the outside more than just a flat serging. So after I serge it, I will iron it to try to make it as flat as possible, and then come back, put these together, and stitch from this point down. Okay, so I'm thinking the best way to attack sewing on this facing is to do just one side at a time. So I'm going to do this side first. I am just folding this entire part down and out of the way. And the seam allowance for this part I'm laying flat. Okay, now I put this face down. I have not pressed this open yet. So I'm putting this face down. I am going to match up my corners, my notches. This little dot should match up with where my stitching started down here, and it does. Okay, that's good. Always love it when that turns out. So I'm going to pin starting down here where that dot is, up here, there's a notch right there that I'm matching up. Ooh, just stabbed myself. That's good. Oh man, I need a band-aid. I hate bleeding on my fabric. And we are back. So this dot here, I am matching up with the dart in the sleeve, which is right here. And the very end should match up with when I open my zipper up flat like this, matching my two edges together like that. And I'm going to need to sew this facing on with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I believe. They don't say anything different, so that's what it is. Now, the seam allowances for the sleeves, I am pressing both of them towards the sleeve. So in the back, it goes towards the sleeve that way, and in the front, it is going towards the sleeve this way, okay? So let me finish getting this pinned, but stitching it, starting actually on this side, it would be easier to start it up here at the top, come around, pivoting very carefully right here. If you need a little cheater to be able to see exactly where to mark, go ahead and draw one on, because sometimes when you're sewing, it can be a little hard. So that's about 5/8 this way, and that is about 5/8 that way. So I have a little point that I can aim for and then shoot straight down. All right, so I got one side sewed, and actually I had a little pucker in two places that I had to pick a couple stitches out and restitch it. So if you do get a pucker, what I do is I take out stitches, you know, depending on how bad it is, a little bit on each side. And then if you pull your fabric really tight in the opposite direction, so say you got a pucker like a little fold this way, well, to make up some room, just pull your fabric really tight this way, and it kind of makes it easier to work that pucker in, and then you can just stitch over it. So anyhow, I need to go ahead and do the other side now the same way. So this is the neck part that has not been sewn yet. So I am just pulling everything else flat down out of the way. Push this little tab down, and everything should line up right at that same spot right here. I'm going to put a pin right there. And do the same thing, pin up here, matching up my shoulder mark to my sleeve pleat and all the way to the very back edge. Okay, so now that I have this sewed on, what I need to do is I'm going to trim to within about 1/8 of an inch of that corner, and around the neckline I'm going to put little clips so that I can turn it easily. Not a real rhyme or reason to it. Oh my goodness, before I fixed, I realized I have a seam allowance that is a little bit tweaked here. But you know what? The facing is going to cover that. Nope, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix that seam allowance. That's going to drive me nuts. So pretend like this seam allowance has been fixed. I'm going to go back to my machine and do that. And it's clipped all the way around here. Okay. So now I'm going to need to understitch. And for understitching, we're going to be pushing the seam allowance towards the private side. And the private side of this right here is the facing. That's on the inside. So I'm pushing the seam allowance over here towards the facing, and I'll be drawing and stitching a line right about there, about 1/8 of an inch in or so, on the top of the seam allowance on the facing side. I'm going to do that down the front. You know, start up as close as you can to the corner, but reasonably it's probably going to be right about there. And also in the neckline. So up here, same thing. I have it clipped so I can push it up easy. But I'm going to put my stitching right here on the facing side of the seam allowance. Alright, when I was understitching, I stabbed myself with my sewing machine needle. That's twice, so keeping my Band-Aid box busy here. It's not that it hurts so bad, it's just that fingers bleed so much, and this is white fabric. And anyhow, TMI, let me flip this right side out here so you can see I was able to get my understitching to about 1 inch away from the corner over here and about the same over here. So I need to press this neck edge over here. This one on this side I already pressed, so it's just down like this, nicely all the way down. Now on the inside, when I have both of them pressed, wherever this facing is going to fall over the seam allowances for the sleeves, I'm going to pin it here and then with a needle and thread stitch the facing to the seam allowances and to this dart. So it'll be here, here, and to the back side seam allowance. I'm going to come back with a needle and thread and stitch it down all 3 of those places just to keep it behaving itself. I just broke another needle. I should start getting special needle awards, you know. I don't know if they just don't make them strong or if I am just way too rough. I don't know. I'm going to get this sharp needle here and just carry on, if I can get it out with my band-aided finger and thumb, and carry on. So I just thought I'd share that with you. So I have this one tacked down and this one tacked down. Now I need to do this one, and once I have these seams and the shoulder dart tacked down, then we'll tackle the very back here. Alright, so these are stitched down, and now back here where the zipper is, I am just going to turn this part under and fold it down. And let me lay this flat so I can make sure I get the right amount over here. I want to make sure this is down here nice and flat. Let me put a pin there and try it out. Okay, so if this was stitched here, would that lay nicely? Yes, yes it would. So I'm going to go ahead with my needle and thread, stitch it across the bottom and then up, carefully up the tape as far as I can get. I'm keeping it far enough from that coil edge that it's not going to get tangled up or bind or anything in there. I don't know why my camera's not focusing well today, but that is how we're going to do it. I will be right back after I have this side stitched in. Okay, so I'm looking at the instructions and I just noticed that they wanted you to set the top of your invisible zipper about 1/2 inch lower than what I did. I did it the standard way with the zipper starting up here. They want your zipper to start here. And then with that gap between the top of the zipper and the top of the facing, they want you to sew in a hook and eye, okay? I did not place my zipper that way. I have my zipper so it goes all the way up to the top of my garment, and so I'm not going to be putting that hook and eye because it closes all the way to the top, so I don't really see a need to put a hook and eye up there. But what they also say is that they say it's optional, so I don't think I'm going to at this point. But they tell you that if you want to, you can put a hook and eye on the underneath here so you can clip it together. Because this does look like a fairly deep opening, if that's something that's going to be concerning to you. On the underside here, so it's hidden, you can put a little hook and eye so that it'll latch together and hold right there. You know, I'm not going to do that right now. And I think that is it. Let me pop it on my dress form for a closer look. Okay, here it is. This is probably going to be one of the last videos outside with no sweater or anything for the winter because it's already chilly out here. But I just wanted you to see it is comfortable. You know, this is very low, but it wants to stay together. You know, if there's that, I think I might close it up about 1 inch more. So when you're sewing that facing and you like sew from this dot down, just put it up 1 inch. And when you're sewing the front together, raise it up 1 inch. You know, that's an easy fix. So next time if I do it, I think I'll do it that way. But, you know, it went together pretty well. The other thing is, of course, on this hem, I would wait and hem the entire peplum after it's all put together, so it's just one big hem going around instead of pieces of hem and everything. But all in all, it went together pretty well, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
My bucolic life, 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.